You've probably seen the videos about the caveman. You know the ones, grunting people in ragged animal skins, desperately hunting mammoths with crude spears, huddled around fires in dark caves, living short, brutal lives. Nothing could be further from the truth. 10,000 years ago, humans were in the middle of the most pivotal transformation in our entire history. They weren't dumb brutes. They were us, clever, adaptable, innovative people facing a world changing faster than anything we can imagine today. Disappear, the coastline where your ancestors had hunted for thousands of years. Suddenly, underwater, the familiar animals you relied on for food, gone, replaced by strange new creatures moving in as forests spread across former tundra. And here's what the movies get really wrong. Instead of being crushed by these changes, humans thrived, innovating solutions that would ultimately create our modern world. This wasn't some small regional affair. By 10,000 years ago, humans had spread to nearly every corner of the globe, developing unique solutions to unique environments. Some were domesticating dogs and experimenting with farming. Others built elaborate religious monuments requiring massive cooperation. Some lived in communities of hundreds. Imagine your neighborhood, except everyone knows every single person's name, strengths, and stories. That's a connection to humanity we can barely comprehend today. Before we start, likes and subscribes help me keep making these. Where are you listening from? Drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always reading them thinking, wait, people in New Zealand listen to history stories to sleep? So we're going back to 10,000 years ago tonight. But hold on, get yourself comfortable first. I mean it. Fix your pillows, grab that blanket. This one's worth settling in for. Your eyes open to a world in transition. It's dawn, but not like any dawn you're used to with your blackout curtains and memory foam mattress. The first sensation is the cold damp of the morning air against your face, the only part of you exposed from beneath the pile of furs you're wrapped in. You're lying on a bedding of dried grass, soft enough, but nothing like your pillow-top mattress back home. The shelter around you is simple but effective, a circular structure of branches and saplings driven into the ground, bent inward and lashed together at the top, the whole thing covered with sewn-together hides from last season's hunts. The dwellings of your community form a rough circle around a central hearth where the embers of last night's fire still glow faintly in the early light. Inside your shelter, you're not alone. This small space, maybe 15 feet across, houses your entire extended family. Parents, siblings, maybe grandparents, a couple of aunts or uncles. Privacy isn't really a concept that exists, at all. Everyone sleeps in a communal pile, sharing warmth and protection. The sounds of breathing and the occasional snore or murmur form a familiar backdrop to your awakening. The smell hits you next. Wood smoke, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling poles, the earthy scent of the people around you, because daily bathing isn't really a thing, and something else, the aroma of food. Someone's already up and cooking the morning meal. "Fire's going!" a voice calls softly from outside. "River's running high again." The world outside your door is changing in ways you can actually see day by day. Not the slow, invisible climate change we talk about now. This is rapid, dramatic, in-your-face transformation. 10,000 years ago, Earth was coming out of the last major ice age. The planet was warming and fast. Not by 2 degrees over a century like we worry about today. Try more like 7 degrees in a few decades in some regions. Glaciers that had dominated the landscape for thousands of years were retreating northward at a pace you could literally track with your eyes over months. "You know what my grandmother told me." The older man speaks as he tends the morning fire, adding small sticks carefully to build the flame. "She said when she was a child you couldn't even see the valley to the north, just a wall of ice taller than 20 trees stacked on top of each other. Now look at it." You follow his gaze across the encampment to where the landscape opens up into a vast, newly revealed valley, still dotted with small ponds from the melting ice, new growth of unfamiliar plants sprouting everywhere. For people alive during this time, it wasn't just the weather changing, it was the entire world. Plant and animal species were shifting their ranges, some disappearing altogether. That woolly mammoth your grandfather's hunting stories centered around, gone, or nearly so. The massive glaciers that had locked up so much of Earth's water were melting rapidly, and sea levels were rising, in some places by as much as 160 feet in just a few generations. Imagine watching the coastline where your ancestors had fished for countless generations just disappear under the waves, and not gradually, but fast enough that elders in your community would point and say, "I used to gather shellfish right there where the water is now." The old hunting grounds are gone, a middle-aged woman says as she stirs a pot of morning porridge made from wild grains. My father's father used to tell stories of hunting the great mammoths in the wide-open lands to the east. Now it's all becoming forest. Different animals now. Smaller, faster. Better eating, though, a young man jokes, patting his stomach. Those big deer that moved in taste better than mammoth ever did, from what I heard. You never tasted mammoth, an elder snorts. Tough meat, but there was so much of it from one kill, it would feed the whole band for weeks. One of the most dramatic effects of this global warming was happening along the coastlines. As water levels rose, vast areas of land were disappearing underwater. In Europe, an entire region known as Doggerland, once a fertile plain connecting Britain to continental Europe, was slowly vanishing beneath the North Sea. Communities had to adapt or die, and they adapted. When the familiar animals disappeared, they learned to hunt new ones. When rising waters claimed their coastal homes, they moved inland. When the plants they had gathered for generations were replaced by new species, they experimented, learned what was edible, what was medicinal, what was poisonous. This was humanity's superpower, not brute strength or sharp claws, but adaptability, the ability to observe, learn, innovate, and pass that knowledge on to others. You wouldn't recognize many of the solutions they came up with in what's now the Middle East. Some communities were experimenting with a radical new idea, deliberately planting seeds rather than just gathering what grew naturally. The earliest forms of agriculture were taking shape. Not because someone had a brilliant flash of insight, but through generations of gradually developing knowledge about how plants grew and reproduced. "My cousin's people to the south," says a visitor to your camp as everyone gathers around the morning fire, "they've started doing something strange. They collect seeds from the best grain plants and put them back in the ground in the same place every season. They say it makes more grain grow there next year." "Why bother?" someone asks. "The grains grow everywhere without all that work." "Not everywhere," the visitor replies, "and not as big as the ones they grow, and they always know exactly where to find them." The idea seemed bizarre to many. Why plant what grew naturally? But in some environments it was starting to make sense, especially as the climate changed and food sources became less predictable. In these early agricultural experiments lay the seeds of a revolution that would transform human society forever. But here's the thing, this transition didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen everywhere at once. While some groups in the Fertile Crescent were starting to plant crops and even domesticate animals like goats and sheep, others around the world continued as hunter-gatherers. Not because they weren't smart enough to farm, but because in their environments, hunting and gathering was still the better strategy. The world 10,000 years ago wasn't one single story. It was thousands of different stories playing out simultaneously across every continent except Antarctica. In some places, like what's now Turkey, people were coming together to create extraordinary monuments like Göbekli Tepe, massive stone pillars arranged in circles, carved with images of animals and abstract symbols. This site predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years and shows a level of social organisation and shared purpose that archaeologists once thought impossible for non-agricultural societies. The people from the Stone Mountains to the south, an elder tells the children gathered around him, they spend half the year moving great stones to build circles for their spirits. Hundreds of people working together, pulling stones as tall as 10 men. "Why would anyone do that?" asks a wide-eyed child. "For their gods," they say. They believe the stones connect them to the spirit world. The child frowns, unconvinced. Your people have your own spiritual beliefs, your own rituals. Every group does. The diversity of human culture was already rich and complex. Meanwhile, in what's now East Asia, people were making some of the world's first pottery. In South America, communities were domesticating plants like squash and peppers. In North America, hunter-gatherers were developing sophisticated systems for managing the landscape through controlled burns to promote the growth of favored food species. And all of this was happening without writing, without metal, without the wheel, just human ingenuity, careful observation, and knowledge passed down through generations. As you step out of your shelter into the full light of morning, the camp is coming alive around you. Children are being sent to collect water from the nearby stream. Hunters are checking their weapons and discussing where the deer might be feeding today. Women are grinding wild grains using stones worn smooth by generations of the same motion. An old man sits carefully knapping a new stone blade, each practiced strike of his hammerstone sending flakes flying. These aren't the stereotypical cavemen of movies. They're people with deep knowledge of their environment, complex social relationships, rich spiritual lives, and sophisticated technology, even if that technology is made of stone, bone, wood, and hide rather than metal and plastic. Think about the skills needed to survive in this world. You'd need to know hundreds of plant species, which were edible, which were medicinal, which were poisonous, and when and where to find them. You'd need to understand animal behavior intimately to be a successful hunter. You'd need to be able to make tools, build shelters, preserve food, treat injuries and illness, navigate without maps or compasses, predict weather patterns, maintain social relationships in close-knit groups, and pass all this knowledge on to the next generation. The average person 10,000 years ago wasn't less intelligent than we are. They just focused their intelligence on different problems. The river's higher than yesterday, reports a young woman returning with water. If it keeps rising, we'll need to move the camp to higher ground. Already, groans an older man. We just settled here with the last full moon. The ice upstream must be melting faster this season, explains the elder. Every year the warm comes earlier. This was the reality of life in a rapidly changing climate. Flexibility wasn't just useful, it was essential for survival. Unlike us, with our permanent structures and massive infrastructure that makes rapid adaptation difficult, these people could pack up an entire community and move in a day if necessary. Their belongings were few but precious, well-crafted tools representing hours of skilled work, dried foods to sustain them through lean times, containers made of hide or woven plant fibres, perhaps some personal ornaments or sacred objects. Everything had to be portable, durable, and worth its weight for a people always on the move. But not everyone was constantly mobile. In resource-rich areas, some communities were becoming more sedentary, staying in one location for months or even years. This wasn't because they were advancing toward agriculture and civilization as older historical narratives suggested. It was simply because in some environments, staying put made more sense than moving around. The camps that stayed in place longer began to look different. Shelters became more substantial. Food storage solutions grew more sophisticated. Social structures adapted to more permanent community arrangements. In some places, this would eventually lead to the first villages and towns. But that was still in the future for most of humanity 10,000 years ago. As the morning progresses, you join a group heading out to gather food. The spring plants are emerging, and there are roots, shoots, and early berries to be collected. Every person in the group, from the children to the elders, knows exactly what to look for and where. This knowledge wasn't written in books, it was carried in memory and taught through observation and practice from earliest childhood. See this plant? An older woman points to a small green shoot barely visible among the grasses. When the tall trees have leaves the size of a thumbprint, these roots are sweetest. Earlier they're too small, later they grow bitter. She carefully digs around the plant with a pointed stick, loosening the soil without damaging the root. Like this, so it will grow back next season. Take too many from one place and they won't return. This was sustainability practiced not as an ideology but as essential knowledge for survival. Take too much and there won't be food next year. Harvest carelessly and the plants won't regenerate. These weren't romantic, noble savages living in perfect harmony with nature. They were practical people who understood that their survival depended on the continued health of the ecosystems they relied upon. The knowledge they possessed was staggering in its detail and precision. Experimental archaeology has shown that many of the technologies developed by Stone Age peoples were incredibly sophisticated. Modern attempts to replicate their techniques for making stone tools, tanning hides, starting fires, or crafting waterproof containers often fail unless every detail of the process is exactly right. As you help gather early spring plants, filling a woven basket with shoots, roots, and berries, you spot movement at the edge of the newly established forest. A small group of hunters from your band is returning, dragging something between them. "Good hunting," someone calls out. "A young deer," comes the proud reply. "Got separated from its mother. Clean kill with the first spear." This wasn't the dramatic mammoth hunt of caveman movies. More often, hunting was opportunistic, taking advantage of whatever game presented itself, and it wasn't always successful. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups suggest that in many environments, the plant foods gathered primarily by women provided the majority of calories, with meat being an important but less reliable component of the diet. The hunters bring their kill to the central area of the camp. Nothing will be wasted. The meat will be shared among all the families. The hide will be scraped clean and tanned for clothing or shelter materials. The bones will become tools. The sinew will be used for binding and sewing. Even the stomach contents, partially digested plant matter, might be incorporated into a medicinal poultice. This was life 10,000 years ago, deeply communal, intimately connected to the environment and centered on detailed knowledge passed down through generations. It wasn't paradise. There were conflicts, hardships, and challenges, but it also wasn't the primitive struggle for mere survival, often portrayed in popular culture. These were modern humans, anatomically identical to us, with the same capacity for language, art, music, spirituality, love, jealousy, generosity, and cruelty. They lived in a world we can barely imagine, one where humans were just one species among many, not the dominant force on the planet. A world without writing, without cities, without agriculture in most places. A world changing rapidly as the ice retreated and new ecosystems emerged. And in this world, they not only survived, but adapted in ways that would ultimately shape the course of human history. The agricultural experiments beginning in a few scattered locations would eventually transform human society completely. But that transformation was just beginning, and no one could have predicted where it would lead. As the day progresses, you watch the sun track across the sky, marking time in the most ancient way. There are no clocks, no schedules, no appointments, just the rhythm of daylight and darkness, the seasons, the migrations of animals, the ripening of plants. Time moves differently here, both faster and slower than in our modern world. The camp buzzes with activity throughout the day. Everyone has tasks, processing the morning's hunt and gather, repairing tools and shelters, teaching skills to the younger generation, tending the fires, preparing for tomorrow's needs. There's no distinction between work and leisure as we understand it. Life is simply lived, moment to moment, season to season. As evening approaches, the community gathers again around the central hearth. The day's food is shared, meat from the deer, spring plants prepared in various ways, perhaps some dried berries or nuts preserved from the previous autumn. Meals are communal affairs, strengthening the bonds that hold the group together. Stories are told as darkness falls, tales of ancestors, explanations of the natural world, recountings of journeys to distant places, lessons encoded in narratives that have been passed down for generations. Without writing, memory is crucial, and these oral traditions carry the accumulated wisdom of countless lifetimes. The firelight flickers on faces not so different from those you might see around a modern campfire. People laugh, argue, flirt, gossip, plan, and wonder. They look up at the same stars we see today, though they know them by different names and stories. As you lie back down in your shelter that night, surrounded by the warmth and sounds of your sleeping band, you might reflect on how different this life is from your comfortable modern existence. And yet there's something deeply familiar about it too. The human connections, the daily rhythms, the blend of challenge and comfort. This was life at a pivotal moment in human history, poised between the ancient ways of hunting and gathering that had sustained humanity for hundreds of thousands of years, and the agricultural revolution that would transform human society forever, neither better nor worse than what came before or after, simply different, adapted to its time and circumstances, full of innovation and tradition woven together. And as you drift towards sleep beneath your pile of furs, the sounds of the night forest filtering through the walls of your shelter, you carry with you a deeper understanding of your own place in the long human story, a story that connects you across 10,000 years to those distant ancestors who faced a changing world with courage, creativity, and the uniquely human ability to adapt and thrive. The morning light filters through the smoke hole of your shelter as you sit with an elder who's working on a new tool. His weathered hands move with practiced precision, each tap of stone against stone deliberate and controlled. The sound is sharp, rhythmic, a soundtrack as old as humanity itself. Too hard and it shatters, he explains, showing you the stone core he's working. Too soft and you just make dust. He strikes again, and a perfect flake separates from the larger piece of flint. But this isn't the crude, clunky stonework you might imagine. The blade he's created is tiny, smaller than your thumbnail, yet razor-sharp along one edge. The small ones are better, he says, holding it up to catch the light. Use less material, can be resharpened many times, and when you bind them to wood or bone, he shows you a wooden handle with a groove cut along one side. Many small blades make one big tool. These weren't just rocks tied to sticks. 10,000 years ago, humans had perfected stone technology to an art form that modern craftspeople struggle to replicate. The tiny blade you're watching being made is called a microlith, literally small stone, and it represents one of the most sophisticated stone technologies ever developed. My grandmother made them even smaller, he says with a hint of competitive pride. Could fit 20 on a finger, sharp enough to slice a falling hair. Tool-making was everything in this world. Your survival literally depended on the quality of your implements, not just for hunting, but for processing food, making clothing, building shelter, creating containers, and crafting other tools. And every environment required different solutions. In the camp, someone calls out. A hunting party is returning, their movements purposeful but relaxed. Good news then. As they approach, you can see they're carrying several large fish strung on a wooden pole between two people. The river's running with spring fish, announces the lead hunter, a woman in her 30s with deep laugh lines around her eyes. We took these with the new basket traps, worked better than the spears. Technology wasn't stagnant. Innovation happened constantly, driven by necessity and opportunity. The fishing basket she mentions is a new design, woven reeds shaped into a funnel that lets fish swim in but makes it hard for them to find their way out. It's a passive hunting method that works while you're doing other things, an efficiency that frees up valuable time and energy. What's striking about the tools of 10,000 years ago isn't their crudeness, but their specialization. Every ecological niche, every resource, every task had custom-designed implements perfectly adapted to the job. There were specific tools for fishing versus hunting land animals, for processing different plant foods, for woodworking versus hide preparation. "Show them what you found," the woman says to a younger member of the fishing party. The young man, barely more than a boy, proudly produces a strange object from his pouch, a chunk of reddish-brown material, washed up on the riverbank, he explains. It's heavy, and look, he strikes it against a rock and sparks fly. "Ironstone," says the elder, taking it carefully. "Very valuable, makes the best sparks for fire starting." This chunk of iron ore isn't going to be smelted. That technology is still thousands of years in the future, but its properties make it valuable just as it is. Striking iron pyrite against flint creates hot, long-lasting sparks that can ignite tinder much more easily than friction methods like the hand drill or bow drill. Fire making wasn't a mysterious, difficult task for these people. They had multiple reliable methods developed over generations, but anything that made the process easier or faster was a welcome innovation. Fire meant warmth, protection, cooked food, and light after sunset, extending the productive day. Across the camp, another technology demonstration is underway. A group of women sit together, processing the hides from yesterday's deer hunt. First with the stone scraper, explains an older woman to several younger ones. She holds a rounded stone tool with a sharp edge, using it to remove bits of flesh and fat from the inside of the hide. Clean it completely or it rots. Then soak in the brain mixture, adds another, gesturing to a wooden bowl filled with a greyish paste. The deer's brain mixed with water. That makes it soft. The third step, she explains, is the hardest. Hours of pulling, stretching and rubbing the hide to keep it flexible as it dries. Without this crucial step, the skin becomes hard and brittle when dry. But properly prepared, a process called brain tanning, the result is a soft, supple material similar to modern chamois leather. My hands hurt for days after my first hide, laughs one of the younger women, but now I can do 2 in a day if needed. The clothing made from these hides wasn't the stereotypical caveman outfit. Archaeological evidence suggests that people 10,000 years ago had already developed sophisticated garment-making techniques, including tailored clothing, fitted leggings, tunics, and boots specifically shaped to the human body. When winter comes again, you'll need a new coat, the older woman tells a child watching the process. You've grown too big for your old one. We'll make it longer this time, with extra fur around the neck. In colder regions, clothing was often made with the fur still attached for better insulation. In warmer areas, lighter garments of processed hides or woven plant fibers were common. One size definitely did not fit all. Clothing was adapted to climate, activity, and personal needs. Near the central hearth, another crucial technology is on display. A man carefully coils thin strips of willow around a frame of sturdier branches, creating a basket. But this isn't simple weaving. He's incorporating a waterproof lining of pine resin to make a container that can hold liquids. The old way leaked too much, he explains to an observer. This way, the water stays where you put it. Container technology was as important as tools for cutting or hunting. Without metal or pottery in most regions, people created water carriers, food storage, and cooking vessels from materials like wood, bark, tightly woven plant fibers, animal organs, and hollowed gourds. Some were so well crafted they could actually be used to boil water, not by placing them directly on fire, but by adding heated stones to the liquid inside. Or watch, says a woman tending the cooking area. She uses wooden tongs to lift a smooth river stone from the edge of the fire and carefully drops it into a water-filled basket. The water immediately begins to steam and bubble around the hot stone. Another, she says, and a helper provides a second heated stone. This is how we make the root stew. Cook it without burning the basket. This stone-boiling technique allowed for a whole range of foods to be safely cooked and consumed. Toxic compounds in many plant foods can be neutralized by proper cooking, vastly expanding the available food resources. This wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving, about making the most of every available calorie in the environment. The roots taste better this way, explains the cook. Sweeter, and they don't make your stomach hurt after. As midday approaches, activity in the camp shifts. Some people depart with hunting or gathering gear, while others focus on maintenance tasks, repairing tools, working hides, processing foods for storage. The technologies on display are diverse, specialized, and sophisticated, each representing generations of accumulated knowledge. In one corner of the camp, a shelter is being repaired. Unlike your temporary hide structure, this one is more substantial, a framework of bent saplings covered with carefully arranged bark sheets and additional support poles. We'll be here through the summer at least, explains the woman directing the work. Worth making it stronger. The last big rain leaked through there. She points to a section of the roof. What about those people to the south? Asks a helper. The ones who pile up the mud blocks to make their houses. Too much work, she laughs. And what happens when you need to follow the herds? You can't carry a mud house on your back. She's referring to one of the most significant technological transitions happening in some parts of the world 10,000 years ago, the development of permanent architecture. In the Fertile Crescent and a few other regions, some communities were beginning to build durable structures using sun-dried mud bricks, stone, and timber. Sites like Jericho already had stone walls and towers, the beginnings of what we would recognize as architecture rather than temporary shelters. But this wasn't happening everywhere. For many groups, mobility remained essential to survival, and their dwelling technology reflected that need. Structures that could be quickly erected, dismantled, and transported, or simply abandoned and rebuilt as needed. The shelter technology you're seeing repaired represents a middle ground, more substantial than a simple lean-to designed to last a full season or more, but not a permanent structure. It's perfectly adapted to a community that stays in one location for extended periods, but still moves seasonally with resource availability. "Hand me that binding cord," the woman says. Her helper passes over what looks like ordinary plant fiber rope, but it represents another sophisticated technology, cordage. Making strong, durable string, rope, and binding material was essential for everything from hunting, bowstrings, snares, fishing line, to shelter construction to tool making. Different plants yielded fibers with different properties, some stronger, some more flexible, some more rot-resistant. Processing these fibers and spinning them into usable cordage was a specialized skill. 3 strands twisted together, she explains, showing the technique. Much stronger than one thick strand, less likely to break. This same principle, that multiple thin elements properly arranged are stronger than a single thick one, appears in technologies across cultures and time periods. It's not a coincidence, but a fundamental engineering insight discovered and applied thousands of years before formal engineering existed as a concept. Across the camp, a different kind of technology demonstration catches your attention. A young man sits with a curved piece of wood, carefully shaving tiny amounts from one side with a sharp stone blade. "Bow making," explains someone nearby. "His first. Been working on it for half a moon now." The bow was one of humanity's most significant technological innovations, a way to store muscle energy in wood and sinew and release it explosively to propel a projectile. It transformed hunting, allowing humans to take down game from a safer distance with greater accuracy. But making an effective bow required deep knowledge of materials and their properties. "Not any wood works," the young bowyer says, sensing your interest. "This tree grows on the rocky slope, gets more sun, grows slower, stronger." He shows how one side of the bow is being carved from the heartwood, the other from the sapwood of the tree. Heartwood resists compression. Sapwood stretches without breaking. Together, they make the bow work. This intuitive understanding of material properties, gained through observation and experience rather than formal materials science, guided all technology development in the ancient world. People didn't need to understand why certain materials behaved as they did. They just needed to know that they did consistently enough to be reliable. As the young man works, an older hunter approaches to inspect his progress. "String?" the elder asks. "Deer sinew," the younger man replies. "From the back leg, been saving it since winter." The elder nods approval. Sinew, the connective tissue from animal tendons, was one of the strongest natural fibers available, perfect for bowstrings and for backing bows to increase their power. When dried, it shrinks, adding tension to the bow's design. And for arrows? Straight shoots from the river bushes, stone points for big game, hardened wood points for birds. Even the humble arrow represented multiple technologies working together. Shaft materials chosen for straightness and proper weight, fletching, feathers attached to stabilize flight, points designed for different prey, and adhesives to hold it all together. Those adhesives themselves were a technological marvel, typically made from rendered animal hooves or fish swim bladders mixed with pine resin and sometimes strengthened with plant fibers or crushed charcoal. The recipes were complex, developed over countless generations of trial and error. The binding pitch needs to be just right, the elder advises. Too thick, it cracks when dry. Too thin, it doesn't hold. Near the central hearth, another technological system is being prepared: cooking stones. Not all stones work for the stone boiling method you saw earlier. Use the wrong type and they can explode when heated or crack too quickly in water. These river rocks, explains a woman selecting stones carefully. Smooth ones, they heat evenly and don't break as easily. She arranges her chosen stones at the edge of the fire, not in the flames directly, but where they'll heat gradually. This prevents thermal shock that could cause dangerous shattering. My mother used clay pots for cooking, comments someone watching the process. Where did she learn that? Asks another, surprised. From the people beyond the eastern hills. They shape the river clay and burn it until it's hard as stone. Can put it right on the fire. This casual exchange references one of the most important technological transitions occurring around 10,000 years ago, the development of pottery. In some regions, particularly East Asia, ceramic technology was already well established. In others, it was just being discovered or learned through cultural contact. And in many areas, it remained unknown, with people relying on the older technologies of stone boiling and direct fire cooking. Too heavy to carry, comments the stone cooking expert dismissively, and when they break, they're useless. At least a basket can be repaired. This highlights an important point about ancient technology adoption. Innovations weren't automatically embraced simply because they were better in some abstract sense. They had to make practical sense within the existing lifestyle and resource patterns of a community. For highly mobile groups, pottery's weight and fragility were significant disadvantages despite its benefits for cooking and storage. As afternoon arrives, you notice a group gathering around a man who's arrived from another band. He carries unusual items, shells unlike any found in the local rivers, bright minerals not native to this region, and what appears to be a small tool made from an unfamiliar, dark stone. From the people near the big water, he explains, displaying his goods. They'll trade for good furs and red ochre. Trade networks were another sophisticated technology of ancient peoples, social systems for exchanging resources across ecological boundaries. Materials like obsidian, volcanic glass that makes exceptionally sharp tools, were traded hundreds of kilometers from their sources. Shells, amber, and colourful minerals moved even further, primarily as decorative or ritual items. That black stone knife, says your band's leader, examining the obsidian blade. How many furs? 3 good winter fox, replies the trader, or 5 rabbit. Steep, mutters someone in the crowd. It cuts twice as well as flint, the trader argues, and makes cleaner cuts for hide work. These exchanges weren't simply economic transactions, they were also transfers of information, news from distant regions, new technological ideas, stories and cultural practices. Trade networks served as the internet of the ancient world, allowing innovations to spread far beyond their points of origin. As the trading continues, you notice a woman working on something delicate, a necklace of carefully drilled shell beads interspersed with animal teeth and small chunks of amber. For my daughter's coming-of-age ceremony, she explains, showing how she drills the tiny holes using a sharp stone point spun rapidly between her palms. Every bead tells part of our band's story. This technology, personal adornment, might seem trivial compared to hunting tools or fire-making, but archaeological evidence shows that beads, pendants, and other ornaments were among the most consistently produced items across human cultures. They served crucial social functions, marking identity, status, group membership, and life transitions. The shells in her necklace come from over 100 kilometers away, evidence of those same vast trade networks that moved obsidian and other resources. Some shell beads from this time period have been found hundreds or even thousands of kilometers from the oceans where the shells originated. The amber is from my grandmother's necklace, she adds, and she got it from her grandmother before her. Objects moved not just across space but through time, heirlooms passing between generations carrying memory and identity. In a world without writing, these material items served as physical links to the past. As evening approaches, the technological displays shift again. A man brings out a hollow log with animal skin stretched tightly across one end, a drum. Another has what looks like a simple flute carved from bone. Music technology is among humanity's oldest innovations, with evidence of instruments dating back at least 40,000 years. New song from the Western people, the flute player announces. He begins a haunting melody, and the drummer joins with a steady rhythm. Around the growing evening fire, people begin to dance, another technology of sorts, using the body itself as a tool for expression, community building, and sometimes ritual purposes. The movements aren't random but structured, clearly following patterns known to the participants. They say, "It brings the spring animals," someone explains to you. "Dance the deer path, and the deer will follow." This represents yet another type of technology, not material but conceptual, systems of ritual, belief and practice designed to influence the world through means we might now call symbolic or psychological. To the people performing them, however, these were practical technologies, as real and effective as their stone tools or fire-making techniques. As darkness falls completely, the technology of light becomes crucial. Someone adds specific resins to the fire that burn with a brighter, cleaner flame. Others bring out small stone lamps, shallow bowls filled with animal fat with plant fiber wicks, providing portable illumination. In the deep winter, an elder tells the children gathered around, when darkness comes early and stays late, these lamps are as important as spears. Without light, we couldn't make tools or clothing during the long nights. The technology on display around you as day transitions to evening isn't primitive or simple. It's diverse, specialized, efficient, and sustainable, using locally available renewable resources to meet every need from basic survival to artistic expression. Each item represents not just its immediate function, but generations of accumulated knowledge about materials, processes, and techniques. What's most striking is how integrated it all is, not compartmentalized like modern technology, but woven into every aspect of daily life. The person who makes the spear also understands the behavior of the animals it will hunt. The basket weaver knows where and when to gather the best materials. The cook understands which plants need which preparation methods to be safely edible. This integrated knowledge system allowed human communities to adapt to almost every environment on Earth, from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest, coastal regions to high mountains, grasslands to deserts. Each adaptation required its own specialized toolkit, developed through careful observation and generational learning. As you settle in for the night, watching the firelight play on the walls of your shelter, you might reflect on how different this technological world is from our modern one. No electricity, no metals, no fossil fuels, and yet, within its parameters, it was incredibly sophisticated and effective, allowing people not just to survive, but to thrive in environments that would quickly kill most modern humans stripped of their technological support systems. The tools, shelters, clothing, weapons, containers, and conceptual systems developed by our ancestors 10,000 years ago weren't steps on a predetermined path leading inevitably to our current technology. They were complete functional systems perfectly adapted to their time, place, and purpose. Neither better nor worse than what came later, simply different, designed for different needs and different resources. And as you drift towards sleep, warmed by the furs made possible by sophisticated hunting and hide processing technologies, sheltered by a structure representing deep knowledge of local materials and environmental conditions, your last thought might be one of appreciation for the ingenuity of those ancient innovators whose technological foundation still underpins our modern world in ways we rarely recognize. A child's laughter breaks the morning quiet as a group of youngsters chases each other around the central hearth. Their game halts abruptly when an older woman calls out, "If you've got energy to run, you've got energy to work," she says, but her stern tone is softened by the smile in her eyes. "Grab your baskets. The spring roots won't dig themselves." The children groan dramatically but comply, each retrieving a small woven basket sized perfectly for their height. Work and play weren't separate categories here. Both were woven into the fabric of daily life, with children participating in food gathering from the earliest ages. They could be useful. "Can we check the snares first?" asks the oldest boy, about 10 winters old. The woman considers this. "Fine, but be quick about it. And remember—" I know, the boy interrupts. "If anything's caught, don't try to take it out myself. Come get an adult." Food acquisition dominated daily life 10,000 years ago, but not in the desperate, hand-to-mouth way we might imagine. Most communities had sophisticated systems combining hunting, fishing, trapping, and plant gathering, diversified approaches that spread risk and ensured someone was likely to return with food even on days when others came back empty-handed. As the children race off toward the nearby forest edge where small game snares were set the previous evening, the camp's day fully begins. Food preparation from yesterday's gathering is already underway at several hearths. "Too bitter," declares an older woman, spitting out a sample of some root she's been cooking. "Needs to soak longer. Or maybe it's just not ready yet," suggests a younger woman kneeling beside her. "Last year we didn't dig these until the moon was fuller." This casual exchange represents a crucial survival skill, detailed knowledge of when specific plants were at their peak edibility. Harvest too early or too late, and the same species might be less nutritious, more bitter, or even toxic. This knowledge wasn't written down but maintained through constant observation and communication between generations. Nearby, a man works at grinding something in a shallow stone mortar. The rich, nutty smell identifies it as acorns, a dietary staple in many regions, but one that required significant processing to remove bitter tannins before consumption. "Third soaking," he explains, seeing your interest. "Almost sweet enough now." In another part of the camp, 2 women work together pounding dried meat into a powder, mixing it with rendered fat and dried berries. This pemmican, a high-calorie, long-lasting travel food, would sustain hunting parties on extended trips or provide emergency rations during lean times. "We'll need more before the summer journey," one says to the other. "Last year we ran out by the 3rd day." The variety of food processing techniques on display is remarkable. Drying, smoking, fermenting, grinding, soaking, leaching, each method developed to make specific foods safer, more digestible, longer lasting, or more palatable. These weren't random discoveries, but systematic approaches to food security developed over countless generations. A shout from the forest edge announces the return of the children. The oldest boy is waving excitedly. "Or rabbit in the 3rd snare," he calls. A fat one. An older teenager heads over to help retrieve the catch. Even a single rabbit is significant. Not just immediate food, but also fur for sewing, bones for tools, and sinew for binding. Nothing would be wasted. "Good morning for hunting," comments an elder watching from the shade of a large tree. "Wind from the east means the deer won't smell you coming." 3 men and 2 women are preparing to depart, checking their weapons and securing carrying cords to their belts. This hunting party isn't going after small game like rabbits, but larger prey. Deer, perhaps, or wild boar if they encounter one. "We'll check the ridge path first," says the lead hunter, a woman of about 40 with a notably muscular build. "Saw fresh tracks there yesterday." "What about the valley?" asks one of the men, adjusting the strap of his spear thrower. too soon," she replies confidently. "The new grass isn't high enough yet. They'll still be on higher ground." This represents another aspect of food acquisition knowledge, understanding animal behavior so intimately that you could predict their movements based on subtle environmental cues like vegetation growth or weather patterns. Effective hunting wasn't about strength or speed, but about knowing where animals would be before they arrived there. As the hunting party departs, they move with practiced efficiency, spreading out in a formation that suggests they've done this hundreds of times before. There's no obvious hierarchy. Decisions appear to be made through brief discussions based on each person's observations. Back in camp, the day's gathering expedition is also preparing to leave. This group is larger, several older women, a few younger ones, and most of the children old enough to help. They carry different tools than the hunters, digging sticks, cutting implements, and baskets of various sizes. "We'll start at the sunny slope," directs an elderly woman who seems to be leading the group. "The spring beauty should be up by now. Then check the wetlands for cattail shoots." "What about the hillberries?" asks a younger woman. The elder shakes her head. "Still too early. Another half moon, maybe." Unlike the stereotypical image of men hunting while women gathered plants, the reality in many hunter-gatherer societies was more fluid. While there were often typical gender patterns, these weren't rigid rules. Some women were skilled hunters, some men were expert plant gatherers. The division of labor was practical rather than ideological, taking advantage of individual skills and circumstances. "You come with me today," the elder gathering leader says to a teenage boy. "Time you learned the spring plants better. You nearly poisoned yourself with false carrots last year." The boy looks embarrassed but nods agreement. This is how specialized knowledge was transmitted, through direct instruction in real-world settings, observation and hands-on practice. There were no textbooks or formal classrooms, but education was nonetheless systematic and effective. With both hunting and gathering parties now departed, the camp might seem emptier, but plenty of activity continues. Those remaining include nursing mothers, the elderly, the temporarily injured, and people engaged in essential craft activities like tool making or hide processing. Near one hearth, an animated discussion is taking place among several older men and women, the apparent decision-makers of the group, though there's no obvious single leader. "The water's rising faster this year," says a grey-haired man, gesturing toward the nearby river. "If it keeps climbing, we'll need to move to the higher camp earlier than usual. The fish are running strong, though," counters another. "If we leave too soon, we miss the best fishing." "What about the old marsh camp?" suggests a woman wearing an intricate shell necklace that marks her status. "It's higher ground, but still close to the river." This casual-seeming conversation actually represents sophisticated community governance. Major decisions like camp relocation affected everyone's survival and required balancing multiple factors: food availability, safety, shelter options, proximity to resources. The apparent informality masked a complex process of information sharing, risk assessment, and consensus building. Unlike the strict hierarchies that would develop in later agricultural societies, most hunter-gatherer groups operated with what anthropologists call assertive egalitarianism, systems where leadership was situational, based on who had relevant skills for a particular challenge. Power was diffused among multiple respected individuals, and group consent was required for major decisions. "We should send scouts to check the marsh camp before deciding," suggests a woman who's been quietly listening. "See if anyone else has claimed it this season." This reference to territorial considerations highlights another aspect of social organization. While boundaries were more fluid than in modern nation-states, groups did recognize certain areas as their primary territory or as shared zones where multiple bands had usage rights. Conflicts over territory occurred, but were often resolved through negotiation rather than outright warfare, which was costly for all involved. As midday approaches, people who've been working near camp begin to gather around the central hearth, drawn by the smell of cooking food. A large flat stone placed at the fire's edge serves as a cooking surface, where someone is preparing a kind of flatbread from ground seeds. "New recipe," explains the cook, a middle-aged man with burn scars on his forearms. "More of the small brown seeds, less of the grass seeds. Holds together better." He demonstrates by flipping one of the flatbreads without it breaking apart. This isn't just cooking, but culinary experimentation, the kind that would eventually lead to the development of agriculture in some regions. People weren't just passively gathering what grew naturally. They were actively selecting preferred varieties, processing them in ways that enhanced their properties, and gradually developing the knowledge that would enable farming. The meal being prepared is communal, with everyone contributing something and everyone receiving a share. This food sharing was a cornerstone of hunter-gatherer social systems, a form of risk management ensuring that even those who came back empty-handed on a particular day would still eat. "Good day fishing," announces a woman returning to camp with a string of gleaming fish. She adds them to the communal meal preparation without hesitation, though it clearly represents hours of her skilled labor. When the hunting party returns a short time later, they're also successful, carrying a young deer suspended from a pole between two of the hunters. Again, this substantial prize is immediately contributed to the communal food supply without any apparent accounting of who gets what in return. "Got it with the first spear," says one of the hunters proudly. "Clean throw, right behind the shoulder." "Lucky," teases another. "The wind shifted just as you threw." "Luck or skill, we eat tonight," intervenes the older hunter, ending the friendly dispute. The gathering party returns gradually, in smaller groups, some with impressively full baskets of spring roots, shoots, and greens, others with more modest collections. Children proudly display their contributions, receiving praise disproportionate to the actual amount gathered, a form of positive reinforcement encouraging them to develop these crucial skills. The elder who led the gathering expedition carries something special, a handful of early spring flowers. "Not for eating," she explains, seeing someone's questioning look. "For remembering." She moves to a quiet area at the camp's edge where several small mounds of earth and stone are arranged in a loose circle. She places the flowers on one of these, murmuring something too quiet to hear. These are graves, the community's way of maintaining connection with departed members. This spiritual dimension was integrated into daily life, not separated as religion often is in modern societies. The natural world, human community, and spiritual beliefs formed a unified whole rather than compartmentalized spheres of existence. As the communal meal comes together, you notice that distribution isn't completely random. The elderly receive choice portions without having to ask. Children are served early rather than made to wait. Nursing mothers get extra of certain foods believed to promote milk production. The successful hunters and gatherers don't take larger shares despite having done the work of acquiring the food. This represents a social system emphasizing communal welfare rather than individual accumulation. Status was earned through contribution to group well-being, not through hoarding resources. The anthropologist James Woodburn called this an immediate return economy, where resources are consumed as needed rather than accumulated as property. "Tell us about the great marsh hunt again," a child requests of an elder as everyone settles with their food. The old man smiles, clearly pleased to be asked. "It was before most of you were born," he begins, launching into what's obviously a well-known community story about a particularly successful hunting expedition. This storytelling served multiple functions. Entertainment, certainly, but also education, cultural transmission, and social bonding. Without written records, oral tradition was the library, the archive, the historical repository of the community's collective knowledge and identity. As the meal progresses, you notice subtle social dynamics at play. Certain individuals are listened to more attentively. Some family groups sit closer together. There's casual physical contact, shoulders touching, children climbing into laps, people feeding each other choice morsels that reveals the intimate social bonds within the group. "My mother's brother's daughter will join us next moon," announces a young woman during a lull in conversation. Her band lost 3 to sickness last winter, too few to make a strong group now. This matter-of-fact statement represents a crucial adaptive mechanism in hunter-gatherer social systems, fluidity of group composition. While core family bonds remained important, band membership could change as circumstances required. Individuals or families might join or leave groups based on resource availability, social conflicts, marriage, or events like the illness mentioned. "Is she a good worker?" asks someone practically. "Strong gatherer, knows the marsh plants well," comes the reply. This fluidity helped maintain optimal group sizes, large enough for collective security and work sharing, but not so large that local resources would be depleted too quickly. Anthropologists suggest that the cognitive limit for stable social groups in humans is around 150 individuals, sometimes called Dunbar's number after the researcher who proposed it. Hunter-gatherer bands typically numbered 20-50 people, forming larger tribal associations of multiple bands that would gather periodically for social, ceremonial, or practical purposes. As afternoon deepens, the community's activities shift again. The hunters begin processing the deer, a systematic operation where every part has a purpose. Meat is separated for immediate cooking, drying, or smoking. Hide is prepared for tanning. Bones are sorted for tool making. Sinew is carefully extracted for use as binding material. Even the brain will be used, preserved for the hide tanning process. Meanwhile, the gathered plant foods also undergo various processing methods. Some are cooked immediately, others are prepared for drying or storage. Seeds are carefully separated and sorted, some for immediate consumption, others preserved for future planting or as insurance against hunger during less abundant seasons. "These we save," instructs a woman, sorting tiny seeds into different containers. "Plant them near the summer camp when the weather warms fully." This isn't yet agriculture as we define it, but it represents an intermediate step, deliberate replanting of preferred food species in locations where they might not naturally grow, or to increase their density beyond what would occur naturally. This practice, sometimes called pre-agriculture or proto-agriculture, was widespread among hunter-gatherer groups and laid the conceptual groundwork for the later development of true farming. As you observe these food-related activities, you notice they're also social occasions. People work together, talk, laugh, tell stories, sing, and teach each other while processing the day's harvest. What might appear utilitarian on the surface is simultaneously serving social, educational, and cultural functions. A young woman asks an elder about a particular plant preparation technique. A father shows his son how to properly cut meat for drying. Two friends work side by side grinding seeds, their conversation flowing easily between practical matters and personal stories. A group of children help sort berries while listening to an older child tell a fantastic tale about talking animals. "No, like this," says a woman, gently correcting a younger person's technique for weaving a storage basket. The tight weave keeps the small seeds from falling through. These teaching moments happen constantly, almost unconsciously, as part of normal daily interaction. Knowledge flows from more experienced to less experienced, but not always along strict age lines. Someone might be the recognized expert in a particular skill regardless of their age or general status. As evening approaches, the camp's social dynamics shift subtly. The day's practical work winds down. People gather in smaller groups, often family units or close friends. Conversations become more intimate. Children play quieter games or listen to stories from their elders. An older woman begins singing softly as she works on a piece of embroidery, decorating a hide garment with dyed porcupine quills in an intricate pattern. Others join in, the song clearly familiar to everyone. The harmony is simple but haunting, the kind of music that seems to rise directly from the landscape around them. "Song of the spring return," explains someone, seeing your interest. "We sing it every year when the green things come back." This represents another aspect of hunter-gatherer social life, the marking of seasonal transitions through ritual, art, and celebration. These weren't simply superstitious practices, but ways of encoding important ecological knowledge and reinforcing group identity through shared experience. Near the main hearth, two elderly men play a game involving carved stone pieces moved across a pattern scratched in the dirt. They're deeply absorbed, contemplating each move carefully, while spectators watch with evident interest, occasionally commenting on particularly clever or foolish choices. This scene contradicts another stereotype about ancient peoples, that their lives were consumed entirely by survival necessities, leaving no time for recreation or abstract thinking. Archaeological evidence suggests that games, music, art, and other seemingly non-essential activities have been part of human culture for tens of thousands of years. As night falls completely, the community gathers once more around the central hearth. The fire is built up, providing both warmth against the spring night's chill and light that extends the social day beyond sunset. Food is shared again, lighter than the midday meal, but still communal. Still following the same patterns of distribution that ensure everyone's needs are met. Conversation flows easily, ranging from practical plans for tomorrow's activities to humorous stories, from discussions of weather patterns to reminiscences about community members long gone. There's a gentle rhythm to this evening gathering, a comfortable familiarity that speaks to the deep social bonds within the group. "Remember when that bear came right into camp last summer?" someone says, launching a story that clearly everyone has heard before but still enjoys. The communal laughter that follows certain parts indicates shared memories, inside jokes, the kind of social shorthand that develops among people who have lived closely together for years. This evening gathering serves multiple social functions beyond the obvious ones of food sharing and practical planning. It reinforces group cohesion. It provides a forum for subtle conflict resolution through humor and storytelling rather than direct confrontation. It creates space for the transmission of cultural knowledge from older to younger generations. As you listen to the stories and conversations flowing around the fire, you might reflect on how these social patterns, developed over thousands of generations of human evolution, still resonate in our modern interactions. The circle around the campfire has become the dinner table, the coffee shop, the social media platform. The forms have changed, but the fundamental human need for connection and shared meaning remains. Gradually, as the night deepens, people begin to drift away from the central gathering, returning to their family shelters. Parents carry sleeping children. Couples walk together, talking quietly. Elders move slowly, aided by younger relatives. The community doesn't sleep all at once like we often do in our electrically lit modern world. Some remain awake, tending the fire, keeping watch, continuing quiet conversations or solitary tasks by firelight. Others will wake during the night and take their turn at these duties, creating a gentle cycling of wakefulness that ensures someone is always alert to potential dangers. As you return to your own sleeping place, wrapped again in those functional, comfortable furs, you might marvel at the social sophistication you've witnessed throughout the day. This wasn't the stereotypical primitive existence of popular imagination, a brutal, chaotic struggle for individual survival. It was a complex, interconnected social system that successfully sustained human communities for thousands of generations. Neither paradise nor nightmare, it was simply a different way of organizing human society, one built around direct relationships rather than abstract institutions, around sharing rather than accumulation, around adaptation to local environments rather than transformation of them. Neither better nor worse than our modern arrangements, just profoundly different in its assumptions and outcomes. And as you drift towards sleep, the murmur of quiet voices still audible from the central hearth, you might wonder what aspects of that ancient social wisdom might still have value for our very different world. Lessons about sustainability, community, and what it truly means to be human passed down to us across 10,000 years of turbulent history. Dawn arrives gently, the first light filtering through the smoke hole of your shelter. The camp stirs slowly, unhurried. Unlike yesterday's immediate bustle of hunting and gathering preparations, today has a different rhythm. The elder with the shell necklace, the one who spoke about the marsh camp, moves deliberately from shelter to shelter, speaking quietly to each family group. Full moon rises tonight, she tells your group. We honor the ancestors at the sacred stones. Her words ripple through the camp, changing the day's energy. Children grow quieter, adults more focused. This isn't fear or dread, but a shift towards something deeper, a collective turning inward that you can feel in the air itself. Will the dreamer dance? Asks a child. The elder smiles, if the spirits wish it. The dreamer, you learn, is what they call the community's shaman, a middle-aged woman who rarely joins the daily hunting or gathering, but serves a different, equally vital function. She's the bridge between worlds, the keeper of the community's spiritual knowledge, the one who speaks with ancestors and interprets signs and omens. Haven't seen her all morning, someone comments. She's preparing. Went to the small cave before first light, adds another. With the sacred herbs. As the regular camp activities begin, cooking, tool maintenance, childcare, there's an undercurrent of anticipation. Several people are working on special preparations for the evening ritual. Some are grinding red ochre into powder, mixing it with animal fat to create a paint-like substance. Others are preparing special foods, not the everyday meals, but something reserved for ceremonial occasions. Dream root needs to soak longer, instructs an older woman, checking a small wooden bowl where gnarled roots are steeping in water. Not for everyone tonight, only the dreamer and those seeking visions. This casual reference reveals a sophisticated understanding of psychoactive plants, which ones altered consciousness, in what amounts, with what preparations. The roots she's preparing contain compounds that induce vivid dreams or hallucinations when properly processed and consumed. This wasn't recreational use, but purposeful engagement with altered states for spiritual purposes. By mid-morning, a group is preparing to depart the camp. Unlike the focused hunting or gathering parties you witnessed yesterday, this group moves with ceremonial intent. They carry bundles wrapped in hide, decorated with feathers and shells. Going to prepare the sacred place, explains a young man, seeing your curiosity. Clean away the fallen branches, renew the circle. The sacred place, you learn, is a short journey from the main camp, a natural clearing where large stones have been arranged in a specific pattern, not the massive carved pillars of Göbekli Tepe, but a humbler version of the same impulse to create spaces dedicated to ritual, to mark the boundary between ordinary and extraordinary experience. You can come, offers a woman in the group. Just stay quiet and watch. Do what we do. The journey takes you through forest and then up a gentle slope. The group walks mostly in silence, occasionally pointing out signs in nature that seem significant. A particular bird's call, tracks of certain animals, plants with special properties. These aren't random observations, but meaningful communications in a landscape alive with spiritual significance. Good sign, murmurs someone, indicating a hawk circling overhead. The sky powers are watching. At the sacred place, you find a roughly circular clearing with standing stones arranged in what might appear to be a random pattern, but clearly holds meaning for your companions. They move among the stones with reverence, clearing away winter debris, renewing marks painted on the stone surfaces, placing small offerings, a feather here, a special shell there, a tiny portion of food at the base of the largest stone. This stone is the ancestor, explains a grey-haired man, seeing you watching, the one who first led our people to this river valley many generations ago. He points to other stones in turn. That one is the mountain spirit, that one the river woman, that one the great bear. Each stone represents not just a spiritual entity, but embodies a complex set of stories, lessons, and relationships. Without writing, these physical markers served as mnemonic devices, memory aids that helped preserve and transmit the community's spiritual knowledge across generations. As the group works, someone begins a low, rhythmic singing. Others join, their voices creating a harmonic texture that seems to belong to the landscape itself. The song has no words you can understand, just vocalized sounds that rise and fall like the contours of the hills around you. It's neither happy nor sad, but somehow both and neither, a sonic expression of connection to something larger than individual experience. When the preparation is complete, small fires are lit at specific points around the circle, not for cooking or warmth, though they provide both, but as part of the creation of sacred space. The smoke rises straight up in the still air, creating visible columns that connect earth and sky. "Now, we wait for the others," says the elder who seems to be leading this advanced group. "And for the dreamer." As you sit with them in the growing quiet, you notice how different this feels from the bustling camp activity of yesterday. Time seems to slow. Awareness shifts from doing to being, from the practical concerns of survival to something less tangible but no less essential to these people's lives. "Why do you do this?" you ask quietly. The elder considers your question carefully, to remember who we are, to speak with those who came before, to understand our place in the world, to ensure the animals return, the plants grow, the waters flow clean. These aren't separate objectives, but a unified understanding of human existence as thoroughly embedded in a web of relationships, with ancestors, with other species, with the landscape itself. What we might call religion wasn't a separate domain of life, but the context for all experience, the foundation for understanding how the world works and how humans should behave within it. By midday, the rest of the community begins to arrive, coming in family groups, carrying food and other necessities for the night-long ceremony. Children are unusually subdued, clearly understanding that this is not an occasion for play or noise. Elders are given special places to sit within the stone circle. New fires are lit, more substantial than the first ritual fires, but still placed according to specific patterns. "She comes," someone says softly, and all eyes turn toward the forest edge. The dreamer emerges alone from the trees. She's dressed differently from everyone else, wearing a garment covered with symbols painted in red, black, and white. Feathers and small bones hang from her hair. Her face is painted with parallel lines that change the very shape of her features. But what strikes you most is her presence, a focused intensity that seems to bend the air around her. She moves deliberately, making a complete circuit of the stone circle before entering it. In her hands, she carries a small drum made from animal hide stretched over a wooden frame, decorated with symbols similar to those on her clothing. "The spirits are strong today," she announces, her voice carrying easily to everyone present despite its quiet tone. "They wish to speak with us." What follows is not the frenzied, wild dancing often portrayed in stereotypical depictions of primitive ritual. Instead, it's a carefully structured ceremony that clearly follows established patterns known to all participants. The community arranges itself in concentric circles, with the dreamer and a few assistants at the center. Food is shared, not the casual communal meals of everyday life, but a ritualized distribution where each portion carries symbolic significance. "First for the ancestors," intones the dreamer, placing small amounts of each food at the base of the ancestor stone. "Then for the living, then for those yet to come." This three-part division, honoring past, present, and future, structures much of what follows. Songs are sung in groups of three, dances move through three distinct patterns, stories are told in sets of three, each addressing a different temporal dimension of the community's experience. As the sun begins its descent toward evening, the ritual intensifies. The dreamer begins a rhythmic drumming, simple at first but gradually becoming more complex. Other musicians join, one with a flute made from a hollow bird bone, another with a rasp scraped against a notched stick, creating a percussive texture that interweaves with the drum. "Now we paint the story of our band," announces the dreamer when the music pauses. Children are called forward first, their small hands dipped in the red ochre mixture, then pressed against one of the standing stones to leave clear handprints. Adults follow, adding their own marks. Finally, the elders add theirs, creating a layered record of the community's composition at this particular moment in time. This isn't random graffiti, but a purposeful updating of the sacred place, adding this year's marks to those of previous years, some of which are still faintly visible beneath the newer additions. Without written records, such physical markings served as a form of community documentation, a tangible connection between past and present. Next comes a series of paintings on prepared hide surfaces, not permanent installations but created specifically for this ceremony. The dreamer and several skilled artists work quickly, depicting animals, human figures, and abstract symbols that clearly carry meaning for the observers who murmur in recognition or approval at certain images. The deer that saved us during the Great Snow, someone explains, pointing to one image, when no other game could be found. The flood that took the old camp, says another, indicating a wavy line with small figures caught in it, before you were born. These aren't just decorative art, but visual storytelling, a way of preserving and transmitting crucial community history. Without writing, such images served as prompts for the oral traditions that carried detailed information about past events, particularly those with survival lessons for future generations. As true darkness falls, the full moon rises exactly as predicted. Its appearance is greeted with a collective sound from the gathered community. Not quite a cheer, not quite a sigh, something between the two that expresses wonder and recognition simultaneously. The dreamer stands in the moonlight, arms raised, her shadow stretching dramatically across the ground. "The ancestors are with us," she announces. "They wish to speak." What follows is the most intensely spiritual part of the ceremony. The dreamer consumes a small amount of the prepared dream root mixture, as do a few others who have been preparing for this experience. Then she begins a rhythmic movement, not wild dancing, but a controlled, deliberate motion that gradually increases in intensity as the drums and other instruments create a sonic landscape around her. Her breathing changes, becoming deeper and more pronounced. Her movements become less voluntary seeming, more as if she's being moved by something beyond herself. The watching community remains silent, utterly focused on her transformation. "I see them," she finally says, her voice altered, seeming to come from somewhere else. "They stand at the edge of our circle." She begins to speak messages attributed to specific ancestors, addressing current community concerns, where to find game in the changing landscape, how to respond to the rising river, when to move to the summer camp. These aren't vague, generalized statements, but specific, practical guidance delivered in a context of spiritual authority. For a modern observer, it might be easy to dismiss this as theatrical performance or self-delusion, but anthropological evidence suggests that shamanic practitioners often enter genuine altered states of consciousness during such rituals. The neurological capacity for trance states appears to be universal in humans, though cultures vary widely in how they interpret and utilize these experiences. As the dreamer speaks, community members occasionally respond with questions or comments, creating a dialogue between the living and what they understand as the voices of the dead. There's nothing frightening or threatening about this interaction. It feels as natural as any conversation, though conducted with greater reverence. After delivering the ancestors' messages, the dreamer's trance state deepens. Her movements become more fluid, less human-seeming. Those watching murmur in recognition. "She walks as Bear now," someone whispers. The dreamer's movements have indeed changed to mimic a bear's gait and gestures, not in a crude, obvious way, but with subtle authenticity that suggests deep observation of the animal's actual behavior. She isn't pretending to be a bear, but embodying bear nature as understood within this community's spiritual framework. This shape-shifting, moving between human and animal consciousness, is a common feature of shamanic practice across cultures. It reflects a fundamentally different understanding of the relationship between humans and other species than the one that dominates modern thinking. For these people, the boundary between human and animal wasn't absolute but permeable, with each having qualities and knowledge that could be accessed by the other under certain circumstances. As the night deepens, more community members join in aspects of the ceremony. Some dance in patterns that mimic animal movements. Others tell stories about encounters with spiritual beings or remarkable natural events. Children are included throughout, sometimes participating actively, sometimes watching from the periphery, absorbing the complex symbolic system that will structure their understanding of the world. "This is how we remember," an elder tells a group of attentive children. "The stones hold the memories, the paintings hold the memories, our bodies hold the memories, so even when we are gone, nothing important is lost." Without writing, such multi-sensory participatory rituals were crucial for cultural transmission. They engaged not just intellectual understanding, but emotional and physical memory, creating experiences powerful enough to remain vivid long after they ended. Around midnight, the ceremony shifts focus. The dreamer, emerging from her deepest trance state, leads the community in creating new art, not just handprints or representations of past events, but images related to the guidance received during the ritual. These aren't permanent installations, but temporary creations, painted on prepared hides or even on human bodies, meant to last only until the next significant ceremony. "The deer will return to the eastern valley," she explains as she paints a deer figure with specific markings. "When the moon is half again, they will come with their new fawns." This painting isn't just decorative or commemorative, but predictive, capturing information believed to have come from the spirit world about future events. When those events occur as predicted, it reinforces the community's confidence in their spiritual system. When they don't, there are established ways of understanding the discrepancy, not as failure, but as misinterpretation or changed circumstances in both human and spirit worlds. As the ceremony continues through the night, different community members take more active roles. Some share personal spiritual experiences, others lead specific ritual sequences. The dreamer remains central but isn't performing alone. This is a communal practice where many have important parts to play. "I dreamed of the Great Bear 3 nights ago," shares an older man. "She showed me where the honey trees will bloom this season." He describes his dream in detail, and the dreamer helps interpret elements that might carry broader significance for the community. This reveals another aspect of this spiritual system. While the shaman has special training and abilities, ordinary dreams and visions are also valued as potential sources of important information. In the deepest part of the night, when the moon has crossed most of the sky, the ceremony reaches its most solemn moment. The community falls silent. The fires are allowed to burn lower. The dreamer sits motionless at the center of the circle, eyes closed, barely seeming to breathe. This profound silence stretches for what feels like a very long time. It's not empty or waiting, but full, charged with shared attention and the accumulated emotional energy of the night's activities. For people accustomed to constant background noise, such communal silence might feel uncomfortable or strange, but here it feels like the natural culmination of everything that came before. When the dreamer finally speaks again, her voice is quiet but carries clearly to everyone present. "The world is changing," she says, "faster than in our grandparents' time. The ice mountains retreat, new plants grow where old ones once lived, animals move that never moved before." She isn't telling them anything they don't already know from direct observation, but she's placing these changes in a spiritual context, helping the community understand their meaning within the larger patterns of existence. "The ancestors say we must be like the river," she continues. "The river doesn't fight the changing land, it finds new paths, it continues to flow." This isn't just poetic language, but practical guidance encoded in spiritual terms, advising adaptability rather than resistance to the environmental changes they're experiencing. Without scientific understanding of climate dynamics, such metaphorical frameworks helped communities respond appropriately to environmental shifts they couldn't fully explain. As the first hint of dawn appears, the ceremony begins to wind down. Food is shared again, this time more casually. The formal structure relaxes. People talk quietly among themselves, processing what they've experienced, sharing interpretations of specific moments or images. "The deer painting had 7 spots," a woman remarks to her companion. 7 is a powerful number. 7 days until we should move camp, perhaps. This illustrates how the symbolic content of the ceremony will continue to be analysed and discussed long after the event itself concludes, a form of collective meaning-making that strengthens social bonds while extracting maximum practical and spiritual value from the shared experience. Children who manage to stay awake through the night are now drifting to sleep, curled against parents or grandparents. Some adults are also sleeping, while others maintain quiet conversation or simply sit in contemplative silence, watching the growing light. Was it always like this? You ask an elder sitting nearby. The ceremony? He considers. The form changes, small things are different each time, but the purpose remains, to remember who we are, to understand our place, to honour what sustains us. This perspective challenges another modern assumption, that primitive religious practices were rigid, unchanging, and blindly traditional. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that pre-agricultural spiritual systems were often adaptive and responsive to changing circumstances while maintaining core principles and frameworks. As full daylight arrives, the community begins preparing to return to the main camp. The temporary fires are extinguished with careful attention to preventing any spread. Ceremonial items are packed away to be stored in specific places reserved for sacred objects. The stone circle itself is left largely as it was found, with only the new handprints and a few other markings as evidence of the night's activities. Until the next full moon, people say to each other as they depart, a ritual phrase that simultaneously marks the end of this ceremony and anticipates the next one. The journey back to camp is quiet, thoughtful, with none of the excited chatter that might follow a secular celebration. People walk alone or in small groups, processing their individual experiences within the shared framework of the night's events. Back at the main camp, normal activities resume, but with a subtle difference in quality, a sense of renewal and recentering that infuses even the most mundane tasks with deeper meaning. Children who slept through the end of the ceremony are told stories about what they missed. Those who participated in the dream root ritual rest, their experiences already becoming part of the community's collective understanding. The dreamer, now dressed in ordinary clothing with the ceremonial paint washed away, moves through the camp, checking on those who joined her in the deeper aspects of the trance work. There's nothing mysterious or dramatically different about her now. She's simply a community member with a specialized role, like the skilled hunters or tool makers. The ceremony helps us remember the most important things, she tells you, noticing your continued interest, not just with our minds, but with our bodies, our hearts. So when times are difficult, when food is scarce or dangers come, we know who we are. We remember what matters. We continue. This integration of spiritual practice with practical survival wasn't unique to any particular ancient culture, but appears to have been a common feature of hunter-gatherer societies worldwide. The spiritual and the practical weren't separate domains, but aspects of a unified understanding of reality, one that helped communities maintain resilience through changing circumstances and unpredictable challenges. As the day progresses and normal activities resume, children playing, food being prepared, tools maintained, you might reflect on how different this spiritual system is from many modern religions, with their specialized buildings, professional clergy, and formal texts. Yet, it served similar human needs for meaning, connection, and guidance through life's uncertainties. Neither more primitive nor more advanced than later religious developments, it was simply different, adapted to its specific context, integrated with the practical realities of hunter-gatherer life, and deeply embedded in direct relationship with the natural world that both sustained and threatened human existence. And as night falls again, ordinary this time without the heightened awareness of the ceremony, you might notice how the experience has changed your perception of the community around you. What might have seemed simple or straightforward now reveals layers of meaning and connection. The practical and spiritual aren't separate spheres, but a continuous whole, each informing and supporting the other in the complex business of human survival. Morning comes gently after the ceremony night, the camp quiet as many sleep later than usual. You wake to the soft sounds of someone tending the central hearth, rebuilding the fire for the day ahead. The movements are unhurried, almost meditative. It's the young woman who mentioned her cousin's strange plant-growing practices several days ago. She notices you watching and smiles. Most still sleep, she says quietly. The spirit night takes much energy. You join her by the fire, enjoying its warmth against the morning chill. The camp feels different today, peaceful, reflective, as if the ceremony has created a collective pause for the entire community. My mother's sister's daughter arrives today, she tells you, arranging small sticks carefully around the growing flames. The one from the southern hills, her people do strange things with plants. Strange how, you ask? She gestures vaguely. They put seeds in the ground in straight lines, clear away all other plants around them, bring water to them in carrying baskets when the rain doesn't come. Seems like more work than just finding what grows naturally. This casual conversation touches on one of the most profound transitions in human history, the gradual shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture. But it wasn't happening all at once or everywhere. 10,000 years ago, some communities were beginning to experiment with deliberate cultivation, while others continued traditional foraging patterns that had sustained humans for hundreds of thousands of years. As others in the camp gradually wake and begin their day, there's a noticeable shift in the usual routine. Instead of immediately organizing hunting or gathering parties, people seem content to stay closer to camp, focusing on maintenance tasks, processing food gathered previously, or simply resting and socializing. After the intensity of the ceremony, this day has a different rhythm, slower, more inward-focused. By mid-morning, a small group appears at the edge of the clearing, 3 women and 2 children carrying modest bundles of possessions. The expected visitors have arrived. Your companion from the morning fire hurries to greet them, embracing the oldest woman warmly. My mother's sister, she explains when she returns, leading the group into the camp. The rest of the community welcomes them without fanfare but with genuine warmth, offering food, helping arrange a temporary shelter, incorporating them immediately into the social fabric. The oldest visitor carries something interesting, a small woven bag that she handles with special care. After the initial greetings, she opens it to show the camp elders. Seeds from our special grass, she explains. The one we tend near our camp makes larger seed heads than the wild ones. The elders examine the contents with interest, but some skepticism. These are early cultivars, plants that have begun to change through human selection, but aren't yet fully domesticated. The seeds are larger than their wild counterparts, but not dramatically different. Will they grow here? Asks one elder. Our soil is more clay than yours. Worth trying, replies the visitor. They've grown in 3 different places where we've planted them. This simple exchange represents a crucial aspect of early agriculture, experimentation, information sharing, and adaptation to local conditions. The first farmers weren't following established practices, but inventing them through trial and error, gradually developing an understanding of what worked and what didn't in specific environments. As the day progresses, the conversation between the visitors and the host community continues, focusing increasingly on these agricultural experiments. The southern group isn't fully agricultural. They still hunt and gather most of their food, but they've begun deliberately planting certain species in chosen locations, tending them through the growing season, and selecting the most desirable plants for the next planting. We noticed some grain plants had bigger seeds than others, explains the visitor to an interested group, so we collected those specifically and put them back in the soil near our camp. Next season, more plants had the bigger seeds. This description captures the essence of early selective breeding, humans noticing and favoring specific traits in plants, gradually shifting the genetic makeup of those plants through generations of selection. It wasn't based on understanding genetics, but on practical observation of results. We've tried it with the root plants too, adds a younger woman from the visiting group, choosing the biggest ones to replant pieces from. Some get as big as a man's forearm now. While the conversations about plant cultivation continue, another significant agricultural development is visible at the edge of the camp. A young wolf, or what appears at first glance to be a wolf, lies calmly near one of the shelters, watching the human activity with alert but unthreatening interest. "Not quite wolf anymore," explains a camp member, seeing your curious look. "His mother came to our fires in winter when I was a child. Hungry, less afraid than most. Her pups were born near camp. This one's grandfather, maybe great-grandfather." The animal, somewhere in the transition from wolf to dog, represents another profound change happening in some human communities. The process of animal domestication had begun, not through capture and taming of wild adults, but through generations of selection for animals that could tolerate human proximity. A child approaches the wolf dog and it responds with a wagging tail and submissive posture. The interaction is cautious on both sides but clearly familiar. This isn't a pet in the modern sense, but neither is it a wild animal. It occupies a middle ground, living in association with humans, receiving food scraps and occasional affection in exchange for alerting the camp to dangers and possibly helping with hunting. "He warns when strangers come," says the child proudly, and helps find wounded deer when they run after being struck. Later in the day, the conversation turns to another form of emerging agriculture. One of the elders mentions noticing wild goat herds returning to the same meadows each spring. "If we built a brush fence in that narrow valley pass," he suggests, "we could keep some from wandering off, have them closer when we need meat." This idea, not yet implemented but being seriously discussed, represents the early thinking that would eventually lead to animal husbandry, not capturing wild animals but subtly manipulating their movement, gradually increasing human control over their breeding and behavior. "The hill people south of the Great Lake are doing that with sheep," offers one of the visitors. "Building stone circles to keep them in one meadow, taking just a few for meat, letting the rest breed." These casual exchanges of information were crucial to the spread of agricultural knowledge. Ideas moved along trade routes and kinship networks, being adapted and modified for local conditions as they travelled. There was no single invention of agriculture, but thousands of small innovations and adaptations happening in parallel across many communities. As evening approaches, the combined group prepares a meal together. The visiting women have brought some of their cultivated grain, which they prepare by grinding between stones and then cooking into a simple flatbread on hot rocks by the fire. It's offered to everyone to taste, a novel food that generates considerable discussion. "Tastes sweeter than the wild grain," comments someone. "But is it worth the work of tending it?" questions another, "when the wild grain grows everywhere if you know where to look." This practical assessment highlights an important aspect of the transition to agriculture. It wasn't obviously better than hunting and gathering in all circumstances. In many environments, traditional foraging remained more efficient and reliable than early cultivation attempts. The shift toward agriculture happened first in specific regions where conditions made it comparatively advantageous. As the meal continues, the conversation moves to the broader implications of these plant-tending practices. The visitors explain that they're spending more time in one location than they used to, returning to the same camp repeatedly to check on their growing plants. "We still move with the seasons," clarifies the older woman, "but always back to the plant fields when it's time to tend them." This represents another crucial transition, from fully nomadic lifestyles to patterns involving at least partial sedentism, not year-round permanent settlement yet, but a seasonal cycle that repeatedly included the same locations, particularly those where cultivated plants were growing. "And the plants like it there now," adds the younger visitor. "They grow better in the places we've put them for many seasons. The soil changes." This observation reflects another reality of early agriculture, the gradual modification of the landscape itself through human activity. Repeated cultivation altered soil composition, water flow patterns, and local plant communities, creating environments increasingly favourable to the species humans were selecting. After the meal, as darkness settles over the camp, storytelling begins around the central fire. Unlike the previous night's ceremonial intensity, this is casual, social storytelling, entertainment and education combined. One of the visitors is invited to share news and stories from her community and the regions they've travelled through. 3 days' journey south, she begins. There's a group building something strange, stone houses that don't move. This reference to permanent architecture generates interested questions from the listeners. The visitor describes seeing structures built of stacked stones with mud filling the gaps, featuring flat roofs made of wooden poles covered with more mud. They say they need to stay in that place all year to tend their plants, she explains. Too many plants now to leave them alone. This illustrates another aspect of the agricultural transition, the increase in scale from small experimental plots to larger fields requiring more continuous attention. As communities invested more energy in cultivation, the balance tipped further towards sedentism, simply as a practical necessity. Do they still hunt? Someone asks. Some, replies the visitor, but they keep animals too, small goats in stone pens. They say it's easier than hunting when the wild herds move away. The conversation continues, exploring the advantages and disadvantages of this more settled lifestyle. Some express skepticism, noting the vulnerability of staying in one place if food sources fail or dangers approach. Others show interest in the stability it might offer, particularly for the very young and very old who struggle with frequent moves. What's striking about this discussion is its thoughtfulness, people weighing options, considering implications, sharing observations. This wasn't a blind stumble into agriculture, but a conscious process of experimentation and adaptation, with communities making choices based on their specific circumstances and values. As the evening deepens, the conversation shifts to more immediate concerns, plans for the next day's activities, preparations needed for the eventual move to the summer camp, observations about weather patterns and animal movements. The agricultural discussions aren't separate from these practical matters, but integrated with them, one set of options among many that the community is considering. Before people begin drifting off to sleep, one of the camp leaders raises a question with the visitors. "These seeds you've brought," he says, gesturing to the small bag of cultivated grain, "where would be the best place to try growing them here?" This initiates a more focused discussion about soil types, water access, sun exposure, and protection from foraging animals, all factors that would influence the success of this agricultural experiment. The community is considering adoption of this innovation, but in a careful, limited way, trying it alongside their existing food procurement strategies rather than immediately abandoning traditional practices. "We could clear that small flat area near the spring," suggests someone. "It gets sun most of the day. Need to keep animals out somehow," adds another. "Maybe with thorn branches?" This planning illustrates another feature of early agriculture, its initial implementation as a supplement to hunting and gathering rather than a replacement. Communities maintained diverse food procurement strategies, with cultivation initially serving as just one method among many, an additional security measure rather than a complete system transformation. As people begin settling in for the night, returning to their family shelters or finding spaces near the central hearth, there's a sense of quiet excitement about tomorrow's project, creating a small experimental garden plot. Not a dramatic revolution, but a modest test of a new approach undertaken with practical curiosity rather than ideological commitment. This is how agriculture likely began in many places, not as a sudden revolution, but as a series of small experiments, adaptations, and innovations that gradually shifted the balance of how communities obtained their food. The full implications, permanent settlements, population growth, property concepts, social stratification, weren't visible to those early experimenters. They were simply trying to enhance their food security and stability in an environment that was itself changing rapidly. In your shelter that night, listening to the quiet conversations still continuing around the dying central fire, you might reflect on how this moment, seemingly ordinary, just one day among thousands in these people's lives, represents a hinge point in human history. The agricultural transition that was beginning in scattered locations around this time would eventually transform human society more fundamentally than any development since the control of fire. Yet for the people living through it, there was nothing revolutionary about these changes. They were simply doing what humans have always done, observing their environment, experimenting with new techniques, adapting to changing circumstances, and sharing knowledge with others. The profound historical significance of their choices wasn't apparent to them, just as the long-term implications of our own technological and social innovations often remain invisible to us. The next morning brings a buzz of activity focused on the agricultural experiment. A site is chosen near the spring, where the soil is dark and rich. A group works together to clear it of existing vegetation, using digging sticks to turn the soil and stone scrapers to cut through tough roots. Children help by carrying away the cleared plant material, which will be used as kindling for fires. Needs to be loose, advises the older visitor, demonstrating how to break up the clumps of soil with her hands so the new seeds can put their roots down easily. This represents another aspect of traditional ecological knowledge, understanding soil conditions that promote plant growth developed through generations of observation rather than formal soil science. The prepared area isn't large, perhaps 3 meters square, about the size of a modern kitchen table, but it represents a significant experiment for this community. When the soil is prepared to the visitor's satisfaction, she carefully opens her seed bag and demonstrates how to plant the grain, not scattered randomly as might happen in nature, but placed deliberately in shallow depressions made with a finger, then covered lightly with soil. Not too deep, she instructs, or they struggle to reach the light. The planting becomes a community activity with several people working together under the visitor's guidance. There's a sense of ceremony to it, though not the formal ritual of the previous night's spiritual gathering. This is a different kind of significance, the practical ceremony of trying something new, of engaging deliberately with natural processes. Now we must tell the plants what we want from them, says the visitor when the planting is complete. She kneels beside the plot and speaks directly to the soil in a quiet voice. Grow strong, make many seeds, feed our children. This communication with plants might seem purely superstitious to a modern observer, but it reflects a different understanding of the relationship between humans and other species, one where plants are understood as conscious participants in a reciprocal relationship rather than passive resources to be exploited. Addressing them directly was part of establishing and maintaining that relationship. After the planting, a simple fence is constructed around the plot using thorn branches arranged in a protective barrier. This isn't meant to establish ownership in the modern sense, but to protect the experiment from being disturbed by animals or unknowing human visitors. "How long until they grow?" asks a child. "Many days," replies the visitor. "The moon will be full again, then half again before you see the first green shoots." This long time frame, weeks between planting and visible results, represents another challenge of early agriculture. It required patience and forward planning beyond what was needed for most hunting and gathering activities, as well as faith that the invested effort would eventually yield returns. "Who will watch them when we move to the summer camp?" asks a practical-minded community member. "Someone must come back to check," suggests the visitor. "Bring water if the rains don't come. Keep animals away." This raises one of the complications of incorporating agriculture into a semi-nomadic lifestyle, the need for at least some community members to maintain connection with the cultivation sites, even when the main group moved for seasonal hunting or gathering. In some regions, this eventually led to community segmentation, with some members becoming more sedentary, while others maintained more mobile patterns. As the day progresses, attention shifts from the new garden plot to other activities. The visitors are integrated into the normal routines of the host community, joining gathering expeditions, helping with food processing, sharing childcare. Their knowledge of plants proves valuable beyond the agricultural experiment, as they identify medicinal uses for several local species that the host community hadn't recognized. This root, crushed and mixed with fat, draws poison from wounds, explains the older visitor, showing a particular plant to several interested community members, and these leaves, steeped in hot water, ease the pain of monthly bleeding. This exchange of medicinal knowledge was another crucial aspect of inter-community contact, allowing traditional healing practices to spread and adapt across regions. Without written pharmacopoeias, such face-to-face transmission was essential for maintaining and expanding the collective understanding of plant properties and uses. By afternoon, another aspect of the emerging agricultural revolution becomes visible. One of the host community members has been working quietly with materials gathered the previous day: clay from the riverbank, crushed shell, and fine sand. She's forming small container shapes, smoothing them carefully with wet fingers. Like the ones the stone house people use, explains the visitor, seeing your interest in this activity. For holding water, cooking food, they put them in fire until they become hard as stone. This represents the development of pottery, another technology closely associated with the transition to agriculture. While some hunter-gatherer groups developed ceramic technology independently, its widespread adoption generally coincided with increasing sedentism and food storage needs. The containers being formed aren't sophisticated, but represent early experimentation with a technology that would become fundamental to agricultural societies. Will they truly become hard? Asks someone skeptically, touching one of the damp clay vessels. So they say, replies the visitor. I've seen the finished ones. They don't leak or fall apart, even holding hot water. As evening approaches again, the community's conversation returns to the broader implications of what they've learned from their visitors. The camp leaders sit together, discussing how these innovations might fit with their existing lifestyle. We could plant more next season if this one grows well, suggests one, perhaps in several places along our yearly path, and check them as we move through, adds another. Harvest when ready, leave some seeds for the next planting. This represents an intermediate adaptation, not full sedentism, but a modified mobility pattern that incorporated cultivated resources at multiple locations. Archaeological evidence suggests that many communities adopted such hybrid strategies during the transition period, maintaining the security of diverse food sources while beginning to incorporate agricultural elements. The discussion isn't universally enthusiastic. Some express concerns about depending too heavily on planted foods that might fail if weather patterns change. Others worry about the work involved in clearing and maintaining cultivation plots. Still others question whether the taste and nutritional value of the cultivated plants match their wild counterparts. Wild foods know how to grow strong without our help, argues an older hunter. They find the best places themselves. Why should we tell them where to grow? This perspective reflects a sophisticated ecological understanding rather than simple conservatism. Many hunter-gatherers recognized that wild plants often contained more diverse nutrients than their cultivated counterparts and were better adapted to local conditions. The trade-off between quantity, often higher in cultivated plants, and quality, often superior in wild foods, was one that communities evaluated based on their specific circumstances. As night falls completely, the camp settles into its evening routine. Fires built up against the darkness, food shared, stories exchanged. But there's a subtle difference in the conversations compared to previous nights. People are thinking about longer time horizons, considering possibilities beyond the immediate seasonal cycle, imagining different ways of relating to the landscape around them. This cognitive shift was perhaps the most profound aspect of the agricultural transition, not just changes in technology or subsistence patterns, but in how humans conceptualized time, place, and their own role in shaping the world. Hunter-gatherers typically worked within existing ecological systems. Agriculturalists increasingly created modified environments optimized for human purposes. Before sleep claims the camp, one of the community elders shares a dream she had the previous night. "I saw our children's children," she says quietly, living in one place through many seasons, growing plants in wide circles around their homes, keeping animals near like the wolf dogs, but many different kinds. Their shelters were like small hills made of earth and stone. The dream isn't presented as prophecy, just as a possibility, one potential future among many that the community might choose or reject based on their values and circumstances, but it captures something essential about this historical moment, a glimpse of what might lie ahead as these small experiments and adaptations gradually accumulated into a transformed way of life. As you drift towards sleep again, wrapped in the same furs that have kept you warm through previous nights, you might reflect on how differently we understand this transition from how it was experienced by those living through it. With historical hindsight, we see agriculture as a revolution that fundamentally altered human society. For the people making these early experiments, it was simply one of many adaptive strategies they were exploring in response to a changing world. Neither inevitable nor accidental, the agricultural transition represented human ingenuity responding to specific challenges and opportunities, changing climate, shifting resource distributions, growing population densities in some regions. The fact that similar innovations appeared independently in multiple locations around the world suggests that conditions were ripe for this transformation, but the specific paths communities took varied enormously based on local environments and cultural choices. And as sleep approaches, you might wonder how those early agriculturalists would view our modern world, with its vast monoculture fields, industrial food systems, and profound disconnection from the natural processes that sustain us. Would they recognize it as the fulfillment of their modest experiments, or as something alien to their understanding of how humans should relate to the living world around them? The morning mist hangs low over the camp, softening edges, muffling sounds. You wake slowly, comfortably warm beneath your furs despite the cool dawn air. For a moment, you simply lie still, listening to the quiet breathing of others around you, the distant call of birds, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Days have passed since the planting experiment. The visitors have moved on, continuing their journey to other camps, spreading their knowledge as they travel. Life has returned to its normal rhythms: hunting, gathering, tool-making, food preparation, the endless cycle of activities that sustain the community through changing seasons. But something subtle has shifted. The newly planted garden is checked daily, watered when needed, protected from foraging animals. Children peer eagerly at the soil, watching for the first green shoots. More importantly, conversations have taken on a different quality. People discussing not just immediate plans, but longer horizons, considering possibilities that stretch beyond the next seasonal move. "If the seeds grow well," you overhear someone saying as you finally rise and move toward the central hearth, "we might clear a larger area next spring." These aren't dramatic declarations of revolutionary change, but quiet speculations, tentative steps toward a different relationship with the land and its resources. Just as the first domesticated plants began as subtle variations of their wild ancestors, the transition in human thinking was gradual, almost imperceptible, small shifts accumulating over generations into profound transformation. Near the fire, an elder sits with several children, using a stick to draw in the soft earth. You recognize the meandering line as the river that flows near the camp, and the various marks indicating familiar landmarks along its course. "Here is where we are now," he explains, making a circular mark. "Here is the summer camp where we will go when the moon has been full twice more." Another mark further along the river. "And here is where we will go when the leaves begin to change." A third mark. He's teaching them the community's annual migration pattern, the knowledge that allows them to be in the right places at the right times to harvest seasonal resources. This isn't random wandering, but a sophisticated adaptation to the temporal and spatial distribution of food sources across the landscape. "But what if we stayed here?" asks one child, pointing to the first mark. "Like the seed-growing people?" The elder doesn't dismiss the question, but considers it thoughtfully. If we stayed, we would miss the salmon run in the summer camp and the autumn nuts that grow near the winter camp. We would need to find all our food in this one place through all the seasons. This simple explanation captures a profound ecological understanding, the recognition that mobility allowed hunter-gatherers to effectively harvest resources that were abundant in different locations at different times. Sedentism required either finding environments with unusual resource density or creating such environments through agricultural modification. Could we grow enough seeds to replace the salmon and nuts? Persists the child. Perhaps, the elder replies, that is what some groups are trying to learn, but it would mean changing many things about how we live. This conversation, speculative, exploratory, without definitive answers, represents how communities likely process the emerging possibilities of agriculture, not as an obvious improvement to be adopted without question, but as a complex set of trade-offs to be evaluated based on specific circumstances and values. As you join the small group by the fire, accepting a warm drink made from herbs steeped in hot water, the elder acknowledges you with a nod and continues his lesson. Our way of moving with the seasons has served us well for more generations than anyone can count, he tells the children. Our ancestors learned which plants grow where, which animals can be found in each place, how to read the signs that tell us when to move. This knowledge keeps us alive. His words remind you that hunter-gatherer lifestyles weren't primitive or simple, but represented sophisticated ecological adaptations, thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about specific environments encoded in cultural practices, stories, and direct teaching. But the world changes, he adds after a thoughtful pause. The ice mountains that our grandparents knew are gone now. New plants grow where they didn't before. Animals move in different patterns. We must watch, learn, and sometimes try new ways. This acknowledgement of environmental change and the need for adaptive response captures another reality of human existence 10,000 years ago. Communities were experiencing dramatic climate shifts as the last ice age receded, requiring flexibility and innovation rather than rigid adherence to tradition. As the day progresses, you join a small gathering party, heading to check on the experimental garden and collect early summer berries from a nearby hillside. The conversation as you walk continues the reflective tone of the morning. My grandmother used to say that people and plants made an agreement long ago, says an older woman as she expertly spots and harvests ripe berries. We would carry their seeds to new places and they would feed us. Both would spread further than either could alone. This perspective, seeing agriculture not as human domination of nature, but as a form of mutualism or partnership, reflects how many traditional cultures understood their relationship with domesticated species. Recent scientific research has increasingly validated this view, recognizing that many plants effectively domesticated themselves by evolving traits that made them attractive to human cultivators. The seeds in our garden, adds another gatherer. They're changing to please us, growing bigger, tasting sweeter, and we're changing to please them, staying longer in one place, giving them water, protecting them from other animals that would eat them. This insight that domestication was a two-way process that changed both plants and humans captures something profound about the agricultural transition. Humans were not simply imposing their will on passive nature, but entering into new relationships that transformed both parties in the exchange. When you reach the garden plot, there's visible excitement. Tiny green shoots have emerged from several places in the carefully prepared soil, the first visible evidence that the planting experiment is succeeding. People crouch around the plot, examining the delicate seedlings with wonder and satisfaction. They found their way to the light, says someone softly. This moment of genuine connection with growing plants reveals another aspect of early agriculture, not just calculated resource management, but an emotional and even spiritual relationship with cultivated species. The wonder of seeing seeds transform into plants, plants into food, has resonated through human culture from these earliest experiments to modern times. After checking the garden and collecting water from the nearby spring to nourish the seedlings, the group continues to the berry patch. As you pick the sweet fruits alongside the others, conversations flow naturally between practical observations and more reflective considerations. "These taste better than the garden plants will," comments one woman, popping a fresh berry into her mouth. "Wild foods always do." "But there are never enough," counters another, "not to feed everyone through the lean times." This exchange captures one of the central tensions in the agricultural transition, the trade-off between quality and quantity. Wild foods often contained more diverse nutrients and flavors, but cultivated foods could be produced in greater abundance and with more predictable availability. Different communities resolved this tension in different ways based on their specific circumstances. "My cousin's people," says a younger woman, referring to the recent visitors, "they're changing in other ways too. The ones who stay to tend the plants all year, they gather more things, larger shelters, more tools than they can carry, special containers for storing food through the winter." This observation highlights another consequence of increasing sedentism, the accumulation of material possessions beyond what nomadic lifestyles could support. Archaeological evidence confirms this pattern, with permanent settlements showing dramatically higher densities of artifacts than temporary camps, suggesting different relationships with material goods. "And they argue more about who owns what," adds the woman, "since they can't take everything if they need to move quickly." This casual comment touches on one of the most profound social changes associated with agriculture, the strengthening of property concepts and the potential for increased social inequality. When everything needed to be carried during regular moves, practical limits existed on how much any individual could accumulate. Sedentism removed those constraints, allowing for greater material differentiation between community members. By the time you return to the main camp with berries and other gathered foods, the afternoon is well advanced. The hunters have also returned, successful with several small game animals that are already being prepared for cooking. The normal rhythms of camp life continue: food processing, tool maintenance, childcare, storytelling, but with that same subtle undercurrent of reflection that has characterized the day. Near the central hearth, an interesting project is underway. Several people are working together to create a detailed model of the surrounding landscape using sand, stones, and small sticks. This three-dimensional map represents a sophisticated understanding of the local environment, showing hills, valleys, water sources, and important resource locations. "If we planted more gardens," says someone, placing a small marker on the model, "this flat area near the river crossing would be good. Gets sun most of the day. Soil is dark and rich. Too far from good hunting," counters another, pointing to a different area of the model. "Need meat as well as plants." This practical planning session, using a physical model to support complex spatial thinking, demonstrates the cognitive sophistication of these communities. Without writing or formal mathematics, they were nonetheless capable of detailed environmental analysis and long-term planning based on multiple variables. As evening approaches, the community gathers for the main meal of the day. Unlike the ceremonial sharing from a few nights earlier, this is an ordinary communal meal, but still characterized by careful attention to fair distribution, with special consideration for the youngest, oldest, and those with particular needs. The conversations around the fire remain thoughtful, reflective, touching on the themes that have emerged throughout the day: the experimental garden, the changing climate, the different adaptations that various communities are exploring. There's no sense of revolution or dramatic transformation, just a people thinking together about how best to respond to their evolving circumstances. The dreamer spoke of change, reminds someone, referencing the shaman's words during the full moon ceremony, said we must be like the river, finding new paths when the old ones no longer work. This metaphorical guidance, adapting fluidly rather than rigidly resisting change, captures a common feature of hunter-gatherer worldviews. Resilience often came through flexibility rather than stability, through responsive adaptation rather than permanent solutions. As darkness falls completely, the fire is built up one last time for the night. The elder who was teaching the children in the morning now addresses the gathered community, not with formal authority, but as someone whose perspective is valued. "We have lived by following the rhythms of the land," he says, his voice carrying easily in the evening quiet, moving as the animals move, as the plants grow and ripen, as the waters rise and fall. Our grandparents did this, and their grandparents before them, back to the beginning of our stories. He pauses, gazing into the fire. The gathered community waits patiently for him to continue, comfortable with silence in a way that has become rare in our hurried modern world. "Now, some people are finding different ways," he eventually continues, bringing plants to them instead of going to the plants, keeping animals nearby instead of hunting them where they roam, building shelters that don't move with the seasons. Another pause, this one filled with soft sounds of agreement, not enthusiastic endorsement, but acknowledgement that these changes are indeed occurring in the wider world they're connected to through kinship and trade. "We don't need to choose just one way," the elder concludes. "We can learn from what others try, take what serves us well, leave what doesn't. The world changes. We change with it. This is how we have always survived." This perspective, pragmatic, adaptable, open to innovation while valuing traditional knowledge, likely characterized many communities navigating the complex transitions of this period, not ideological commitments to either progress or tradition, but practical evaluations of what worked best in specific circumstances. As the formal talking concludes, the evening transitions to quieter conversations, small groups or pairs discussing their own thoughts about these matters. Children are settled for sleep, the day's last tasks are completed, the general movement is toward rest, though as always, some will remain awake through the night, maintaining the fire, keeping watch, ensuring the community's safety. In your shelter again, warm beneath the furs that have become familiar over these nights of immersion in this ancient world, you might reflect on the journey you've taken, not just through this particular community's daily life, but through a pivotal moment in